The snow came early that year, a fine biting dust that scoured the peaks and frosted the pines a week before November. We pushed into the Sawtooths with a hunger for silver. 6 men strong, mules loaded heavy with picks and hopes. Deadman's Pass was our destination, a name most men avoided, but then most men weren't looking for a motherlode rumored to run richer than any vein in Idaho. Frank Hollister was my name, and I led the crew. We knew the cold, knew the solitude. We thought we knew the mountains. The air smelled clean, sharp with pine. The only sound was the crunch of our boots and the distant, hopeful ring of a pickaxe against rock in our minds. We were fools. Winter in the Sawtooths had a way of cutting the world down to size. The sky was a perpetual gray, pressed low against the jagged peaks. Pines, ancient and gnarled, bore the weight of fresh snow, their branches thick and still. Every breath was thin, a struggle against the air that tasted of iron and ice. Our boots broke the crust of snow, a steady rhythm against the mountain's indifference. It was brutal beauty, relentless cold. My sheepskin coat, its wool matted over years, did little to keep the bite out, but I'd worn worse. My hands, calloused and thick, kept a firm grip on the reins of the lead mule. 42 years had taught me the value of quiet movement and observation. I led through experience and a stubborn pragmatism. Talk was cheap. Silver wasn't. Behind me, James Mackenzie, barely 23, was all eagerness, tall, gangly, his frame not yet hardened by years of labor. He had the look of a boy, even with the new fur-lined cap pulled low over his ears. His blue eyes, wide and clear, took in every detail of the vast white world around us, a mix of wonder and apprehension for the wilderness. He wore rough woolens and was quick to volunteer, always looking up to me. That was a burden in itself. Beside him, Thomas O'Malley, 28, a red-haired Irishman, walked with a bounce even through the deep snow. He was a stocky man, strong, but his kind eyes always held a hint of a smile. He was the most jovial member of the crew, whistling a tune, something light and forgettable. Every now and then he'd pat the breast pocket of his coat, where I knew he kept a small, worn photograph of his sweetheart. Martha, he called her. He spoke of a small farm, flat land, good soil, the kind of future he planned to buy with his share of the silver. Hopes like that were heavy things to carry into Deadman's Pass. Then there was Silas Boone. 50-odd years of hard living had carved his face into a roadmap of cynicism and hard living. His gray beard was perpetually dusted with ice, and his deep-set eyes, suspicious and narrow, seemed to find fault with the very air we breathed. He wore layers of patched canvas and wool, stained and stiff with grime, and he grumbled about the cold, the pace, the quality of the rations. Silas was a seasoned prospector, no doubt, but his years had made him bitter and distrustful of anything beyond the tangible. He was the first to complain. Jedediah Stone, Jed, walked with the quiet competence of a man who knew his place and his strength. 35, broad-shouldered, a towering figure. His face was usually unreadable, shaded by the brim of his hat, but his steady, watchful eyes missed nothing. He was reliable, unflappable, the kind of man you wanted covering your back when things went south. He rarely spoke, just moved, deliberately, efficiently, like a well-oiled machine. And Willard Finch, Will, 30 years old, lean and wiry, spectacles perched on his nose, a tweed cap. He looked more like a university scholar than a prospector. His sharp, intelligent eyes were constantly scanning, observing, occasionally pulling a small notebook from his pocket to jot something down. He was meticulous, a planner, the one who often pointed out subtle anomalies others might miss. Soft-spoken, he relied on logic, on evidence. He was the one who'd noticed the subtle shift in the rock formations as we'd climbed higher, pointing out faint geological markers that suggested the presence of something valuable. We were a good crew, as good as any. Each man had his purpose, his skill. And each man had his dreams, a different kind of silver in his mind's eye. The trail narrowed as we pushed deeper into the range. The sun, a pale disk in the gray, began its swift descent. Shadows stretched long and blue, filling the valleys. The air grew colder, biting deeper than usual, raising goose flesh even under heavy layers of wool. The crunch of our boots became the loudest sound, the mules snorting plumes of white vapor into the still air. We hadn't seen a single rabbit, no tracks of deer, not even a squirrel. The wildlife was gone, silent. It was an observation I filed away, a small, unsettling detail. By late afternoon, we reached the mouth of Deadman's Pass. It lived up to its name. A narrow, winding corridor flanked by sheer rock faces that scraped against the sky. Ancient pines, thick with snow, crowded the edges, their shadows deep and impenetrable even in the fading light. The wind, which had been a low moan, picked up, whistling through the gaps in the rock, a mournful wail that seemed to carry a forgotten sorrow. It wasn't just cold here, it felt old. The isolation was absolute. No human settlement for miles, no means of communication. "This is it," I said, my voice flat, carried away by the wind. "We make camp here." Jed began unlashing the mules without a word. Will was already scanning the rock faces with his small magnifying glass. Despite the dim light, looking for a suitable spot to start digging in the morning. Tommy helped Mackenzie set up the canvas tents, his whistling now muted. Silas, of course, was complaining. "Couldn't we go a bit further, Frank? This looks like a damn tomb. Wind'll cut right through us here." "Best spot for shelter, Silas," I replied, not looking at him. "And a good vantage point. We're in deep now. No turning back until we find what we came for." The work was hard, hands numb with cold, breath steaming in the rapidly dropping temperature. We cleared a patch of snow near a cluster of massive boulders, setting up our 4 tents in a tight semicircle. A roaring fire was our first priority. Jed and I worked quickly, chopping deadfall, splitting logs. The crackle of the flames was a welcome sound, a small pocket of warmth against the vast, encroaching cold. As dusk deepened into night, the pass became a place of shadows and distorted shapes. The sheer rock faces seemed to lean in, pressing down on us. The pine trees turned into menacing specters at the edge of the firelight. Sounds were amplified and distorted. The groan of shifting ice in the distance, a subterranean rumble that vibrated through the frozen earth. The whisper of the wind through the needles, a constant, unsettling presence, sometimes like an unsettling echo. The mountain itself felt like a living thing, watching. We ate a meager supper of salted pork and hardtack, washing it down with hot coffee. The conversation was subdued, mostly about the next day's plans, the potential yield of the silver. Tommy for a moment brought out his photograph, tracing the smiling face with a calloused thumb before tucking it back away. Mackenzie kept glancing into the darkness beyond the firelight, his blue eyes wide. "You all right, Jim?" I asked him, noticing the way his head kept turning. He started, then shook his head. "Just quiet, Frank. Too quiet, haven't heard a single owl, not even a chirp from a mouse since we entered the pass." Silas scoffed. "It's winter, boy. Animals burrow down, or they're smart enough to stay out of a godforsaken hole like this." Will, ever the observer, chimed in quietly. "He's not wrong, Silas. The usual indicators of small game are absent, even the predator tracks are sparse." He tapped his notebook with a gloved finger. "Unusual, even for deep winter." I grunted, stirring the fire. It was an observation, not a complaint. Will dealt in facts, and the facts were it was unnaturally still. The silence pressed in, amplifying the crackle of the fire, the beat of our own hearts. It was more terrifying than any noise. The moon began to rise, a pale, burgeoning disk peeking over the jagged peaks, casting long, stark shadows across the pass. It wasn't full yet, but it was close. shedding enough light to turn the snow a ghostly blue-white. The cold intensified with the moonlight, a deeper, more profound cold that seemed to seep into the bones. We settled into our tents, the canvas offering little protection from the creeping chill. Jed, Will, Silas, and Tommy in one, Mackenzie and I in the other. I was on the first watch, sitting by the dying embers of the fire, rifle across my knees, a thick blanket wrapped around my shoulders. The air was so still, the pines so quiet, that I could almost hear the stars twinkling in the black sky above. Then it came. A sound. Distant at first, a faint, mournful note carried on the thin air. It started low, a long, drawn-out cry that seemed to rise from the very depths of the mountain. It wasn't the sharp bark of a coyote, nor the deep growl of a bear. This was different. It carried a strange, almost human quality to its sorrow, a lament that echoed off the rock faces, growing louder, stretching, until it twisted into something else, something primal, something that was undeniably lupine, but with a depth and power that no common wolf could ever possess. It was a howl. It rose and fell, a wave of sound washing over the pass, chilling not just the air, but the blood. It seemed to hang in the air for a long moment, vibrating in the chest, a sound born of ice and ancient grief. Then it died away, leaving an even deeper silence in its wake. I hadn't moved. My grip on the rifle had tightened, knuckles white. My eyes scanned the tree line, peering into the shadows beyond the faint firelight, trying to find the source. There was nothing, just the darkness and the silent watching pines, a rustle from the tent behind me. Mackenzie, already awake, his voice a whisper, sharp with a fear he was trying to hide. "Frank, what was that?" "Wolf," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. "Big one, maybe. Sound carries out here." I tried to make it sound convincing even to myself. It was the only rational explanation, the only one I wanted to believe. Mackenzie was quiet for a moment, then sounded like a man howling, Frank, before it was a wolf. I shook my head, though he couldn't see it. Just the echo, Jim. The mountains play tricks, but the seed of unease was planted. I felt it, even if I pushed it down. The howl had been too deep, too long, too knowing. It was a sound that had not merely passed through the air, but had resonated with something ancient and forgotten. The kind of sound that warned you, deep in your gut, that you were not alone, and that whatever was out there, it wasn't just another animal. Not in this place. Not in Deadman's Pass. The moon climbed higher, a cold, indifferent eye. The wind picked up slightly, a soft, sibilant whisper through the branches, a sound like 100 voices murmuring just beyond the edge of hearing. The fire snapped and crackled, a small, fragile barrier against the vast, frozen darkness. I watched the tree line, rifle ready, and waited for the dawn. But the cold, the silence, and the echo of that howl had already begun their work. We had come for silver, but the mountain, it seemed, had other plans, and the first night had only just begun. The first light of morning was a cold, gray smear across the eastern peaks, offering little warmth. We packed up our small camp, the air thick with unspoken apprehension. The memory of the howl still clung to the air, a phantom vibration in the bones. Silas, true to form, was the first to break the silence, a dry cough preceding his words. "Still think it was just a wolf, Frank? That was no common timber wolf I ever heard. Sounded like a damn banshee." "Sound carries in the pass, Silas," I replied, tightening a strap on Jed's pack. "Could have been miles off. We got work to do." I saw Mackenzie flinch at the mention of the howl. His eyes, though, were fixed on the tree line, scanning the snow-laden pines with a nervous intensity. Will, ever the quiet one, was examining the ground around where the sound had seemed to originate, a small magnifier pressed to his eye. He straightened, shaking his head. "No tracks," he reported, his voice low. "At least, nothing obvious. The snow's too fine, too disturbed by the wind. But the silence, it persists. No birds, no squirrels, not even the usual signs of mice near the camp. It's unnatural. Jed just grunted, hefting his pickaxe. Tommy whistled a tuneless, melancholy air as he loaded the last of the cooking gear onto a mule. We forced ourselves into the rhythm of the day, moving further into the past, chipping away at the rock faces, looking for the telltale glint of silver. The work was a brutal distraction. The cold bit deeper than before, and the sun, when it broke through the clouds, offered only a pale, watery light that seemed to mock our efforts. We spent the day prospecting, our hammers ringing against the granite, the sound echoing hollowly in the vast, still air. Each strike, each dull thud, felt like an intrusion. The mountain absorbed our noise, giving nothing back but the constant, watchful silence. We found nothing, not even a promising vein. The rumored mother lode remained elusive, buried deep beneath layers of rock and ice. But the silver for the first time felt less important than the growing weight of dread that settled over us. As afternoon bled into dusk, a new problem arose. We made our way back to our established camp, our shoulders aching, our spirits low. The air was growing heavy, a thick, still cold that promised another bitter night. Jed was the first to notice it, his gaze drawn to our supply cache, a pile of crates and sacks we'd carefully stacked and covered with a tarp against the elements. "Frank," he said, his voice flat. "The cache." My eyes followed his. The tarp was pulled askew. One of the wooden crates holding our dried meat and flour lay overturned. Its lid was pried open, splintered at the edges, not smashed but opened, and the contents disturbed. Bags of flour ripped, meat scattered but not eaten. Not like a bear would have done. This was deliberate. I walked over, kneeling in the snow. The damage wasn't chaotic, it was focused. A sack of coffee beans had been torn open, the dark ground spilled across the snow, forming a stark, unnatural pattern. Our pickaxes, usually stacked neatly beside the cache, were scattered, one driven point first into the frozen earth a good 10 feet away. It was as if something had come not to raid, but to make a point. "Bear wouldn't do this," Will observed, his voice hushed. He picked up a splinter of wood from the crate. "Too precise, and it didn't eat anything, just ruined it." Silas scoffed, though his eyes darted around the tree line nervously. "Some damn varmint got in, probably a wolverine. Nasty creatures, just likes to make a mess for the hell of it." "A wolverine doesn't scatter pickaxes, Silas," Jed said, his voice unusually sharp. "And it doesn't leave a coffee sack torn open like that without taking a single bean." Mackenzie was pale. It's watching us, Frank. It knows we're here." I stood, brushing snow from my trousers. The temperature was dropping fast. We had lost some supplies, not enough to starve, but enough to feel the pinch. More importantly, we had lost something else. The illusion of safety. Whatever was out there, it wasn't just lurking in the shadows. It was actively engaging. It was sending a message. "All right," I said, my voice steady, though a cold knot tightened in my gut. "We'll secure what's left. Double the watch tonight. No fires after dark. We'll use the lanterns inside the tents. Everyone sleeps with their rifle." The men moved with a new urgency, their earlier weariness replaced by a taut, nervous energy. We repaired the cache as best we could, but the damage was done, both to our provisions and to our morale. The mountain had shown its teeth, and it wasn't a wolf's. Night fell quickly, a black curtain dropping over the pass. The moon was higher now, fuller than the night before, casting a spectral glow through the thin clouds. Its light, though, offered no comfort, only extended the reach of the shadows into deeper, more menacing shapes. We huddled in our tents, the lanterns casting flickering light on our drawn faces. The crackle of a small, contained fire in the center of the tent, fueled by scarce wood, was the only sound besides our own ragged breathing. My turn came late. Mackenzie had the first watch, and I was to relieve him around midnight. I had drifted into a fitful sleep filled with images of overturned crates and spilled coffee, when a sudden, sharp intake of breath from Mackenzie's side of the tent jolted me awake. His whisper, thin and ragged, cut through the oppressive silence. "Frank, there." My eyes snapped open. I was on my feet in an instant, rifle in hand, peering through the small slit I'd cut in the canvas tent for observation. The air outside was still, colder than anything I'd felt yet, carrying the scent of pine and something else. Something wild and metallic. The moon, now almost full, bathed the pass in a stark, unforgiving light. The shadows were long, deep, and utterly devoid of comfort, and there, at the very edge of the tree line, where the pines met the snow-covered rocks, it stood. It was colossal, easily 9 feet tall, maybe more, standing upright like a man, but it was no man. Its form was unmistakably lupine, a massive, muscular frame covered in thick, matted fur, dark against the snow, but catching the moonlight with an eerie, icy sheen. Its head was that of a wolf, but stretched, elongated, with a muzzle that seemed too long, too full of teeth. And its eyes, they were amber gold, and they gleamed with an intelligence that was terrifying. They were fixed directly on our tent. My breath hitched in my throat. My rifle was up, pointed, but my hands were shaking, a tremor that ran through my entire body. It was impossible, a creature of myth standing there, watching us. Then the sound came. It wasn't the distant, mournful wail of the previous night. This was closer, much closer. It started as a low, guttural growl, a sound that vibrated through the frozen earth, through my very bones. It deepened, twisting from a bestial rumble into something that held a chilling echo of human sorrow, a primal lament that stretched and climbed, gaining power, gaining rage. It was a scream of pure, untamed fury tearing through the night, a sound that was undeniably wolf, but with a depth and malevolence that could only come from something ancient, something cursed. It tore at the fabric of the silence, ripping it apart, leaving only raw, exposed terror in its wake. It was a howl that wasn't just heard, but felt. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating. The creature remained, its amber eyes burning holes in the darkness, its massive form utterly still. It was watching and waiting. Mackenzie beside me was a shaking wreck. His face was pale, his eyes wide and unseeing, fixed on the horror outside. He made a small, choked sound, a whimper of pure, unadulterated terror. It's real, Frank," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Oh God, it's real." The creature held our gaze for another long, agonizing moment. Then it turned its massive head slowly, deliberately, and melted back into the deeper shadows of the pine trees, vanishing as silently as it had appeared. I lowered my rifle, my arms trembling, my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked at Mackenzie, then at the other men who were now stirring, roused by the unholy sound. Tommy was sitting up, his face ashen, his bright eyes wide with fear. Jed was already reaching for his rifle, his strong hands surprisingly unsteady. Silas, though, was still in his bedroll, his face contorted in a grimace of disbelief. "What in God's name was that?" Tommy breathed, his voice a raw whisper. It was a monster," Mackenzie stammered, his body still convulsing with shivers. "Tall as a pine tree, eyes like burning coals. It was watching us." Silas pushed himself up, his eyes narrowed. "Nonsense, boy. You're seeing things. The cold's playing tricks on your head. Probably a bear stood up on its hind legs in the moonlight." "Too big for a bear, Silas," I said, my voice flat, devoid of the emotion that was churning in my gut. "And it stood like a man. And those eyes, it wasn't no bear. I looked around at the faces of my crew, fear etched into every line. It was watching us, and it howled like a man driven mad, then a wolf possessed. Will, ever the logical one, pulled out his spectacles, his hands fumbling slightly as he placed them on his nose. A creature of that size moving with such stealth, it defies natural explanation, Frank. Natural explanation went out the window when it tampered with our supplies, Jed muttered, checking the action on his rifle. We're not dealing with an animal. We spent the rest of the night huddled in the tents, rifles at the ready, listening to every creak of the ice, every whisper of the wind. Sleep was impossible. The howls didn't return, but the silence felt heavier, more menacing than any noise. The creature had shown itself. It had made its presence undeniable, and it had watched us with eyes that held ancient, terrifying intelligence. When the first gray light of dawn finally touched the peaks, it brought no relief, only a deeper sense of dread. We emerged from our tents, cold, exhausted, and haunted. The air was still, heavy. The pines stood like silent sentinels holding their secrets close. Tommy, trying to force a semblance of normalcy, started to gather wood for a small cooking fire. Jed and Will went to check on the mules, which had been unusually agitated throughout the night. Mackenzie stood beside me, his rifle still clutched in his hands, his eyes darting to the tree line where the impossible shape had stood. "Silas," I called out, my voice raspy from the cold, "get some coffee brewing. We need to plan our next move." There was no answer. My eyes scanned the camp. Silas's tent flap was open, flapping gently in the barely perceptible breeze. His bedroll was still there, a rumpled heap. But Silas was gone. A cold dread, far deeper than the mountain's chill, settled over me. I walked to his tent, my boots crunching softly in the fresh dusting of snow. I looked inside. His rifle was leaning against the canvas. His pack was still there. Everything save for the man himself. Outside the tent, in the pristine snow, there were only a few disturbed patches, a scuff mark, as if something had been dragged. No tracks, no blood, no sign of a struggle, just a chilling, unidentifiable silence where a man should have been. I looked at the others. I looked at Tommy had stopped gathering wood, his axe hanging limply in his hand. Jed and Will had returned, their faces grim. Mackenzie just stared, his jaw slack, his eyes wide with a horror that mirrored my own. Silas Boone, the loudest skeptic, the man who refused to believe in anything beyond the tangible, was gone, vanished. And the mountain gave no explanation, only an empty space where he had been. It was a stark, undeniable confirmation. Something truly monstrous stalked Deadman's Pass, and it had just claimed its first victim. The empty space where Silas had been was a cold knot in my gut. The mountain had taken him, silent and complete. There was no denying it, not anymore, not even for me, not for Jed, not for Will. Mackenzie just stood there, shaking. Tommy dropped his axe. "We move," I said, my voice cutting through the stunned silence. It was raw but firm. "Now, break camp. Get what we can on the mules. We're going back." Panic, cold and sharp, flickered in their eyes, flickered in. We were deep in Deadman's Pass, days from safety. Retreat meant admitting defeat, abandoning the silver, abandoning Silas to whatever had taken him. But staying meant certain death, one by one. Jed moved first, his face a mask of grim determination. He started to unhitch the mules, his strong hands working with a speed I hadn't seen in him since the start of the trip. Tommy, still pale, went for the tents, tearing at the ropes rather than carefully untying them. Will, ever methodical, began to gather the most essential tools, his movements precise despite the tremor in his hands. Mackenzie, still frozen, finally snapped out of it when I clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Mackenzie, help Tommy with the tents. Everything we can carry, fast." The air was still heavy, the silence pressing in. Every snap of canvas, every clink of metal sounded unnaturally loud. We worked in a feverish, desperate haste, our breath pluming in the frigid air. The sun was barely above the eastern peaks, casting long, weak shadows across the snow. The pass felt narrower, the rock faces steeper, the pines denser. Every shadow seemed to hold the impossible shape we had seen. We had almost finished loading the first mule when it struck. There was no warning howl, no distant growl. Just a sudden, immense shadow that detached itself from the deeper gloom of the pines at the edge of the camp. It moved with a terrifying, unnatural speed, a blur of dark fur against the snow. It was on our remaining supply cache before any of us could react. I got my own clear, horrifying look then. The creature was every bit as large as Mackenzie had described, and more. Easily 9 feet tall when it reared up, its colossal frame was covered in thick, matted fur, dark as pitch, streaked with patches of ice that caught the pale morning light. Its head was undeniably that of a wolf, but monstrously proportioned, with a muzzle long and wide, lined with rows of finger-sized fangs that gleamed yellow in the gray light. Its breath, a visible cloud of vapor, steamed from its nostrils. But it was the hands that locked my gaze. They were not paws. They were clawed, black talons, disturbingly like a man's hands, but grotesquely oversized, tearing at the canvas of a supply sack with a sickening rip. My rifle was up, aimed. "Fire!" I roared, the sound thin and reedy in the face of such a presence. Jed, Tommy, and Mackenzie also raised their rifles, the sharp cracks echoing off the rock walls. I squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck the beast squarely in the shoulder. There was a dull thud, a shower of icy particles from its fur, but no yelp, no flinch. The creature merely turned its massive head slowly, its amber gold eyes, burning with a chilling, intelligent malevolence, fixed on me. It let out a low, guttural growl, a sound of pure contempt, then turned back to the supplies, ripping into another sack of flour, sending a white cloud billowing into the air. "It's not stopping," Tommy yelled, pumping another round into his rifle. He fired again, hitting the creature in the chest. Again, nothing. The beast acted as if it hadn't even felt the impact. It pulled a heavy canvas tarp from the mule's back, scattering our remaining gear onto the snow. "Bullets don't hurt it," Jed shouted, his voice strained with disbelief. He fired his last round, then cursed, dropping the rifle. The creature didn't linger. It had made its point. With a final deliberate swipe of its massive clawed hand, it raked across the packed snow near our feet, then turned and melted back into the shadows of the pines as quickly as it had appeared. The silence it left behind was absolute, broken only by our ragged breathing and the frantic snorts of the mules. We stood there, rifles lowered, staring at the torn supplies, at the impossible gouges in the frozen earth. Fear, cold, and absolute had replaced panic. We were not just being stalked, we were being toyed with. "Our flour, our beans," Tommy whispered, looking at the spilled provisions. "It's ruined." It had been an act of deliberate sabotage, not hunger. It wanted us out, and it wanted us helpless. "Get moving," I ordered again, my voice hoarse. "Leave what we can't salvage. We're on foot if we have to be. We're not staying another minute." We quickly consolidated what little remained, mostly ammunition, our bedrolls, and some dried meat. The mules, skittish and wild-eyed, were repacked. We left the torn tents, the spilled flour, the broken crates, a testament to the creature's power and our utter vulnerability. As we were about to begin our desperate retreat, Will, ever the observer, knelt by the edge of the tree line where the creature had appeared. "Frank, look at this," he said, his voice quiet, almost awed. I walked over, my heart still thumping. In the fresh dusting of snow where the beast had emerged was a series of tracks. They started as clear human boot prints, large, heavy, but unmistakably a man's. Then after a few paces they began to smear, to elongate, the shape shifting, blurring into something less human, more bestial. Finally, they morphed into enormous paw prints, clearly defined, over 16 inches long, with 5 distinct toes and massive claws. They were the prints of a wolf, but a wolf of impossible size, a wolf that had just been walking in human boots. My stomach turned. It wasn't just a monster. It was something else. Something that could shed its form, that walked the line between man and beast. The legend of the shapeshifter, the Wendigo of the old tales whispered in the back of my mind. Silas's skepticism, my own pragmatism, it all dissolved into the swirling snow. This was beyond anything we knew, beyond anything rational. It's changing, Mackenzie stammered, his face green. It's not an animal, Will stated, his voice devoid of his usual scientific curiosity replaced by chilling dread. It's something ancient, something cursed. The revelation hung in the cold air, a new layer of horror. This was not a creature of tooth and claw, but of malevolent intelligence, of a dark, unnatural magic. "Let's move," I repeated, pushing the words past a dry throat, straight through the pass. Don't look back. Don't stop. We moved out, a small, desperate procession following our own tracks back towards the mouth of Deadman's Pass. The mules, sensing our urgency, picked up their pace. The snow crunched under our boots, the only sound for a long time. The pass was a narrow, winding corridor flanked by sheer rock faces and dense, shadowed forests. Every rustle of wind in the pines, every groan of shifting ice made us jump. We kept our rifles ready, our eyes scanning the tree line, the high ridges, the shadowed crevices. We were running, but it felt like we were running through a vast, cold tomb. The sun climbed higher but offered no warmth, no comfort. The cold bit deeper. Our breath came in ragged gasps. Exhaustion began to set in, but the fear was a relentless spur. We dared not stop, dared not even slow our pace. It came again, not with a howl, but with a sound like wind rushing through dry leaves, impossibly fast. A flash of dark fur in the periphery, then it was gone. It was toying with us, herding us, driving us deeper into a terror we couldn't comprehend. We pushed on, the trail becoming more treacherous, littered with loose rock and icy patches. We were no longer prospectors. We were prey. Tommy, ever the optimist, tried to keep our spirits up, humming a tune under his breath. But the sound was thin, strained. He kept glancing back, his eyes wide. We were nearing a particularly narrow section of the pass, where the rock walls closed in like giant jaws and the trail was barely wide enough for the mules. I was leading, Jed behind me, then Tommy, Mackenzie, and Will bringing up the rear, watching our backs. Suddenly, a piercing scream ripped through the air. It was Tommy. I spun around. The creature had burst from the shadows directly behind him, moving with a speed that defied its massive size. It was upright, its wolf head thrown back in a silent snarl, its amber eyes fixed on Tommy. One of its colossal, clawed hands had already seized him. Tommy struggled, his rifle falling uselessly to the snow, his red hair a bright, terrible splash against the dark fur of the beast. He let out another choked cry, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror and pain. His struggles were brief, impossibly brief. The creature lifted him effortlessly as if he weighed nothing, his feet dangling uselessly in the air. I raised my rifle, but it was too late. Before I could even aim, before Jed could react, the beast turned, its massive form pivoting with sickening grace. It vanished back into the shadows of the rock face, taking Tommy with it. His final cry, a gurgling, strangled sound, was abruptly silenced. The mountains swallowed it whole. The silence that followed was even worse than before. It was a silence filled with the echo of Tommy's scream, with the sickening image of his struggling form. Jed and Mackenzie stood frozen, their faces pale with shock. Will's spectacles had fallen from his nose, and he stared unseeing at the spot where Tommy had been. "Tommy," Mackenzie whispered, his voice broken. I lowered my rifle. My hands were shaking uncontrollably now, a deep, bone-deep tremor. My gut twisted with a cold, impotent fury and a crushing helplessness. We had seen it. We had witnessed it. Tommy, the jovial heart of our crew, the man with the photograph of his sweetheart, was gone, snatched like a rabbit by a hawk. There was no doubt, no room for rationalization. The monster was real, it was immune to our bullets, and it was systematically hunting us. "Keep moving," I roared, my voice raw, desperate. "Don't stop, don't look back." We scrambled forward, our retreat now a frantic, panicked flight. The exhaustion, the gnawing fear, the dwindling hope, it all converged into a living nightmare. Every step was a struggle, every shadow a potential predator. Deadman's Pass had become a gauntlet of terror, a place where men were devoured and the impossible became chillingly, brutally real. Our dreams of silver were gone, replaced by the indelible image of intelligent amber eyes and the memory of Tommy's final, silenced cry. We were running for our lives, and the mountain itself seemed to mock our efforts, its ancient, indifferent peaks watching our torment unfold. We scrambled forward, our retreat now a frantic, panicked flight. The exhaustion, the gnawing fear, the dwindling hope, it all converged into a living nightmare. Every step was a struggle, every shadow a potential predator. Deadman's Pass had become a gauntlet of terror, a place where men were devoured and the impossible became chillingly, brutally real. Our dreams of silver were gone, replaced by the indelible image of intelligent amber eyes and the memory of Tommy's final, silenced cry. We were running for our lives, and the mountain itself seemed to mock our efforts, its ancient, indifferent peaks watching our torment unfold. The sun dipped, casting long purple shadows that swallowed the pass. The cold deepened, seeping into our bones. We hadn't stopped, not for a moment, not since Tommy. Jed, usually stoic, stumbled. Mackenzie was openly weeping, a silent, shaking mess. Will, his face gaunt, kept looking over his shoulder, his spectacles now gone, his eyes wide and unfocused. I pushed them forward, one foot in front of the other, the only thought left in my head: escape. Our remaining mule, laden with what little gear we hadn't abandoned or lost, slipped on an ice patch. It whinnied, a frightened, desperate sound, struggling to regain its footing. We couldn't spare the time. We cut its lead. The animal looked at us with wide, pleading eyes, then whined as we left it behind, a sacrifice to the mountain. It felt like another death. We kept only our rifles, a few rounds, and a satchel of dried meat. Everything else, the picks, the shovels, the remaining bedrolls, the maps, they were all left for the beast. The creature didn't show itself again in full, not for a while, but its presence was a suffocating weight. We heard the crunch of snow behind us just out of sight. A low growl, echoing from the rock faces, seemed to follow our every move. It was hurting us, I realized, driving us, not hunting to kill us all, but to purge us from its territory. We were being expelled like vermin from a larder. The thought was colder than the mountain air, a chilling display of intelligence that meant we were not just prey, but trespassers being punished. We reached the narrowest part of the pass just as the last light faded. The trail here was a treacherous scramble over loose scree and ice-slicked boulders dropping steeply towards the valley floor. We had to move one at a time. I went first, testing each foothold. Jed followed, his heavy boots carefully placed. Mackenzie came next, whimpering with every step, nearly losing his balance twice. Will, quiet as a ghost, brought up the rear. Halfway down, a sound ripped through the air directly above us. Not a howl, but a sharp cracking roar that reverberated off the stone. A cascade of rocks, large and small, began to tumble from the ridge directly above Will. "Rockfall!" I screamed, pressing myself against the sheer rock face. Will, looking up, froze. He raised his arms instinctively, a futile gesture. A boulder the size of a man's chest bounced once, then crashed down, striking him squarely. He didn't make a sound. His body crumpled, a loose sack of bones, and rolled down the slope, disappearing into the darkness below. The rockfall continued for another agonizing minute, then ceased, leaving only the sound of our ragged breathing and the thumping of our hearts. 4 men left. Now 3. Jed, his face a mask of grief and terror, looked at me. "We can't stop, Frank," he rasped, his voice raw. I knew. There was no going back for Will. No time to mourn. The beast had made sure of it. It hadn't killed him directly, but it had orchestrated his death, a grim shepherd ensuring we kept moving, ensuring we paid for our greed. We continued our descent, scrambling, sliding, half falling, until we finally reached the wider lower valley. The pass, the cursed Deadman's Pass, was behind us. The air here felt different, less oppressive, though still bitterly cold. We pushed on through the night, a desperate march, fueled by adrenaline and the lingering terror. We didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. By dawn, we were out of the immediate shadow of the Sawtooth peaks, moving through a landscape of rolling foothills and scattered pine forests. The world felt wider, less claustrophobic. But the silence that followed us was still unnatural, still heavy. The creature was gone, I knew, but its presence was etched into the very fabric of our minds. The journey to Boise was a blur of aching muscles, frostbitten fingers, and the gnawing emptiness in our bellies. We walked for days, scavenging what little we could, sleeping huddled together for warmth, our minds replaying the horrors of the pass. Mackenzie was silent now, his eyes hollow. Jed was a shadow of his former self, his quiet strength replaced by a haunted weariness. I felt it too, a cold, hard knot in my gut that would never fully loosen. We were survivors, but something essential had been stripped away. When we finally stumbled into Boise, we were a sight. Filthy, gaunt, our clothes torn and frozen. Our faces were etched with a terror that no amount of clean mountain air would ever erase. We walked straight to the sheriff's office, the warmth of the stove a sudden, unfamiliar comfort against our chapped skin. Sheriff Brody was a big man, slow-moving, with a handlebar mustache and a skeptical squint. He listened to our story, his expression shifting from mild concern to outright disbelief. We told him about the silver, about the pass, about Silas and Tommy and Will. We told him about the enormous beast, the wolf-headed horror, the amber eyes, the impossible size, the shape-shifting tracks. 9 feet tall, you say? Brody chuckled, a deep rumble that grated on my ears. He leaned back in his chair, a plume of pipe smoke curling towards the ceiling. Boys, you've been in the mountains too long. High-altitude sickness, perhaps? Or maybe a bad batch of moonshine? Sounds like a bear, a big grizzly, perhaps. Or a pack of wolves got your friends. Mackenzie tried to explain, his voice a reedy whisper. No, Sheriff, you don't understand. It walked upright. It had hands, claws like a man's. Brody waved a dismissive hand. Son, there's no such thing. Your imagination's running wild. You're tired. You're hungry. You've had a rough go of it. I can see that. But a 9-foot wolf man, come now. He shook his head, a patronizing smile on his face. He offered us a meal, a warm place to sleep, but his tone made it clear he thought us mad. We knew it was useless. How could anyone who hadn't seen it believe? As we were leaving the office, defeated, the scent of wood smoke and old hides hit me. An old man sat by the corner stove, hunched over a mug of coffee, listening to our exchange. He was Samuel Pritchard, a trapper I'd seen around Boise for years, a man rumored to be as old as the mountains themselves. His face was a road map of wrinkles, his eyes roomy but sharp. He wore a patched buckskin coat and a beaver hat. He cleared his throat, a dry, rasping sound. "Amber eyes, you say?" he asked, his voice a gravelly whisper. I turned to him. "Yes, gold, almost, intelligent." Pritchard nodded slowly, his gaze distant, as if looking at something far away. "And the tracks? Human boots, turning to paw prints?" Jed stepped forward, his voice hoarse. "How did you know?" The old trapper took a long sip of his coffee. "Heard tales, old tales. My grandpappy told them. Shoshone tales mostly, about Deadman's Pass. Always been a bad place, that pass." He paused, his eyes fixed on us, a knowing look in their depths. "You found the silver, didn't you? Or you were looking for it?" I nodded. That was the plan. "Then you woke him," Pritchard said, his voice flat. "Baptiste Moreau." The name hung in the air. I had never heard it. "Moreau was a Frenchman," Pritchard continued, his gaze unwavering. "Came through these parts round to 80-91, fur trader, then got the silver fever. Greedy man, they said, reckless. Didn't care for the old ways, the sacred places. Started digging where he shouldn't have, up in Deadman's Pass. Shoshone burial grounds, they say, full of old spirits. A medicine man warned him, told him to stop, told him the mountain would claim him, would make him its guardian. Moreau, he just laughed." Pritchard coughed, a deep, rattling sound in his chest. "He vanished 11 years ago. Everyone figured he froze, or a rock slide got him. But the Shoshone, they knew. They said the mountain took him, cursed him, twisted him into something else. Something to guard the silver he lusted for, forever bound to the pass he desecrated. A shapeshifter, Will had said, something cursed." It all clicked into place. The impossible size, the human intelligence in its eyes, the tracks that shifted between man and beast, the targeted destruction of our camp, the herding, the precise, deliberate killings. It wasn't just an animal. It was Baptiste Moreau, twisted by a curse, a man consumed by greed, now an eternal, monstrous guardian of Deadman's Pass. "He won't let anyone take that silver," Pritchard concluded, his voice barely a whisper. "He's the mountain's keeper now, and he'll kill anyone who tries." The sheriff, who had been listening with a half smile, now looked uneasy. He cleared his throat. "Now, Samuel, those are just old wives' tales." Pritchard ignored him. His gaze remained on us, on our haunted faces. "You got out, that's what matters. Not many do once he's got their scent." We left the sheriff's office, the warmth of the stove no longer a comfort, but a reminder of the world we no longer fully belonged to. We were dismissed as madmen, but Pritchard's words, the old trapper's quiet authority, had given context to our horror. It didn't make it less real, but it made it understandable. In a chilling, ancient way, we didn't go back to the Sawtooths. None of us ever did. The silver, if it was there, remained undisturbed, protected by a curse far older and more terrible than any man-made trap. Jed drifted north, never spoke of it again. Mackenzie, the greenhorn, never recovered. He spent his days staring into the distance, his youth withered, the terror never leaving his eyes. I, Frank Hollister, carried it too, a weight in my chest that would never lift. The memory of Tommy's last cry, Silas's disappearance, Will's fall, they were all burned into my mind, as indelible as the snow on the peaks. Years passed. The snow still came early, biting and cold. But now when the wind howled through the canyons, it carried a different sound for me, not just the wind, not just a wolf, not just a It was the echo of an impossible roar, a mournful lament, and a savage promise. It was the howl of Baptiste Moreau, the cursed keeper of Deadman's Pass, forever guarding his silver, forever blurring the line between man and beast, between legend and the terrifying, undeniable truth. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that some places were meant to remain wild, meant to remain untouched, their secrets guarded by horrors that defied understanding, horrors that waited for the next fool to come seeking fortune.